Thank you very much, David. It's a OCO, the Aichigagat. Uh, those are my Cherokee languages to hello and welcome. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation. I'm an architect and planner. I have offices in the desert Southwest and the Pacific Northwest. So I'm honored to be here with you today, and I want to make sure that everybody can see my slides. So if anybody can't, just let me know. But I'm going to get rolling. I've got a few slides to roll through, and I'm not going to read every one, but I'll be happy to share this presentation after if you're interested. So the point of this discussion is to look at how Indigenous knowledge and biomimicry might be actually shared concepts, ideas of ways to actually help heal and regenerate cities. And the premise around this is understanding. I've been working with Indigenous tribes for the last decade, both in the Southwest and the Northwest, and been fortunate to be learn from many different tribal nations, elders, elected officials around that. But also, my background is in interpretive visitor centers and museums, and my work expands this around the ways that connect us and the ways that has connected us in the past and hopefully in the future is a large percentage of our own bodies are made up of water, and part of this is this story starts with the foundation of sustenance, and it is a living relative. This is a culture spiritual connector of waterways that has been historical travel and the trade networks that we connect with, but it's also a way for us to learn to reconnect the ways of the mountains, the rivers, the communities, all the way to the oceans. Waterways are pathways to discussions. And this is a interactive map. Here's the website. You can go discover it if you like. But as you notice, there's no borders that came through colonialization. These are the indigenous populations that are overlaid across this continent. You can go to these places. You can go to the places you work, and you can see who the citizens and the communities that were there before they were colonized and they were forced into different types of living conditions. And this is a foundational piece to understanding this dialogue around how Indigenous knowledge can help reshape the places that we have into a more meaningful engagement with the world, the planet. So, cities today, suburbs today, they really struggle to adapt to the changes that are out there, climate change and global warming and the depletions of fossil fuels, right? These are the natural resources that are really, challenging us as society. We need to understand what do these impacts do to our communities and how they're really creating challenging situations. And as these become more and more scarce and challenging, we have to deal that the minorities of our community, the underserved, the undervalued people are the ones that are going to be the most under these stress. So, in the context of that world, one of the things that Steep's looking around urban regeneration, it starts, currently as a top-down approach. It starts through governments and municipalities, sometimes private developers, but it still lacks to take in the social ecological interest of all residents, all human beings, and for that point, all living things, down to the microbes and the trees and the mountains and the waterways. So one of the ways of a new approach for urban regeneration is start to look at these through a different lens. And what does it mean beyond economic and ecological crises that we're in and financial capital diminishes it? We need to increase the social capital. So how do we do this? How can cities become living participants in the ecosystems they inhabit? Well, iTech might be one of the ways. iTech has been acknowledged by the White House in 2022 under a previous administration. The recognize the indigenous knowledge as one of the many important bodies of knowledge that contribute to the scientific, technical, social, and economic advancements of the United States and our collective understanding of the natural world. Ecology is never culturally neutral, right? In this world, knowledge of water, land, plants, seasons, travel, ceremony, food, materials, and community is carried through culture. So this is a movement, and PSU even has a certificate involved, an ITEC certificate that starts to lead this. But the primer around Indigenous design is looking at the generations that have shaped those Indigenous knowledges, so the practice, the belief structure that created art, architecture, planning, social hierarchy, moving in living in harmonious engagement with the land. It's about celebrating the diversity and the richness, the complexity of Indigenous cultures and communities. And to start there, you have to understand the Indigenous connections to land and place. All Indigenous people are embraced in different ways to the landscapes that they have emerged from, right? They all have different stories of where they came from and what that means. And they have stories that have overlaps, but sometimes those stories are different, and that's perfectly fine. You just have to be able to understand the acceptance of their stories, their belief structure, and what does that mean. And I'll show you a project later where that was an epiphany moment for me in the project that I worked on with them around these different types of connections to the land and the place. Native Americans also have a strong belief, most Indigenous people do, have a strong belief in that you can't own the land. It's no different in their minds that you can't own the air, you can't own the water, you can't own this beauty of the sunlight. Now, we live in a world today where property lines are drawn, air rights are sold, water rights are bought, right? This whole primer around that. But this is the notion that we've been shaped into by our societal norms and the colonialization of our country. Part of that starts to emerge from looking at how Indigenous people see the land. They believe they're in harmonious relationship with the land. And this is where, people considered Indigenous people early not very smart because we traded beads for New York. Well, those Indigenous people thought that was a reciprocal relationship that was building between them and the traders, and the beads were gifts of being able to share the land with them. They never had the mindset because they didn't believe in the mindset of owning land. Now, I believe this is a foundational principle that's a problem with our cities today, and we can talk about that more, further into this project that I'm going to share with you later on. But the point in this is land ownership has caused some of those issues of how cities have become fragmented and less cohesive for all communities. So, and also understanding is sovereignty. There's, over 570 different recognized tribes in the United States, and over 380 of those are recognized tribal citizens in Portland alone. But the key in this is Indigenous people are still here. We are still in this location. We have been transformed from the places that we knew as our traditional homes, but we are still here. And the point around this is shown in this map and this diagram. Now, this is pretty horrific to some, and it's horrific to me, but it's everything else. And currently I'm in West Virginia and Ohio, and as this map starts, this is the foundation of our country in 1776, and where Indigenous lands were still occupied by Native Americans. But as you can see, the gray area, the Indigenous people there had already been pushed away. And as I said, I'm in Ohio yesterday and West Virginia today, and Ohio has no Indian reservations. West Virginia doesn't. Indigenous people, the Seneca people, the Miami people, the Seneca people, they were pushed out of this land as our country began to expand west. And this map shows you exactly how our country dissolved Indigenous land and put Indigenous people on reservations. Those small red dots, typically, which had very useless value until they discovered mineral rights or they discovered fossil fuel rights. And then they tried to push Indigenous people out of that. But to be resilient as a society, it starts with actually understanding nature and how resilient nature responds to those. And right now, we're seeing nature respond to climate issues and climate change. So in the premise of resiliency, we want to talk about the importance of how to protect against and adapt and grow places and empowering communities, nature rewards cooperation, and it speaks to that. We have to understand the language. This is from Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmer's book. It's a great book to read if you haven't touched it yet. The power of reciprocal relationships is the driver, and the opportunities for us as designers has to start around here. The emerging opportunities for change resolve in resiliency planning, design, climate action planning, and disaster recovery. These are the opportunities, but you have to understand this primer before you can move into that discussion. The primer that we've came from is from the ego primer, right? The dominant side, it's the pyramid. And sadly enough, this diagram is so insulting to women because it puts them on the same scale as whales. The male is at the top in the pyramid, and the smallest living organism is at their bottom. And it's completely wrong. It's all wrong because it's based on ego, and we live in that world. Even indigenous cultures, it was matriarchal, and the women were the decision makers. In an eco world where we want to look at a balance of the passive, everything is balanced in a circular, harmonious relationship. But how do we move to a seva relationship, a service relationship, where it's about love of all living things in this place? That's how we move to an Anthropocene epic, that we can talk about how to sustain these places and these experiences that sustain us. That gives us places like this. I live very close to this, matter of fact, across the street, and I'm always amazed by how this park transforms from day to night, from morning through the day, and how many people use it and use it in so many different ways. But it's still one city block. It's 250 feet by 250 feet in Portland, but it represents a lost ecosystem that people still resonate with and still find ways to try to connect with. And in that driver, to understand, cities of today and cities hopefully of tomorrow, what they look like, you have to acknowledge how that development model worked. I mean, our city of Portland was shaped definitely by the river and the boundaries of where ships could unload to create the streets. But as you see, as you move to the Western Hills, we couldn't move mountains. So we adapted our movements of roadways, pathways to the mountains. But to East Portland, it's about laying out the grid, the foundation, the network, the pathways. But this is all around the pursuit of economic development. It's around individual human beings providing for themselves and their families to satisfy a quality of life. In an indigenous thinking model, it moves from less about the individual, but it's about the greater group of the whole, the tribe. How do we actually create tribal sovereignty, cultures, lifeways, ceremonies, kinship, clan relationships, and stewardships of the natural world? This is the primer. It's different than creating profit from the land. It's about creating ceremony. It's about creating relationship. Now, I'm going to move out of the indigenous, and move into the work that I've just completed over the past year, working with the Biomimicry Co-Lab. So this is, I'll mention my partners in this here in a few seconds, but this is work that we've just kind of completed, wrapping up in May, June. But the vision of this was to move from a nature positive, inclusive, regenerative world inspired and guided by nature's genius. That was the idea. The commitment behind this was looking about how this intent using nature could live like an ecosystem in balance with the places that we cherish and would like to protect. The CoLab here, I'm just going to quickly share the group of CoLab. This was a group of international people. I was honored, shocked to be invited into this group. This is some of the leading thinkers across the planet, and it reached from New Zealand to England to New York. And this presentation that you're seeing now was presented at Living Future earlier this year by Kristen Weeks from BioStudio, Dave Goldberg from Methuen, and Jared Goldberg from Cook and Fox, and myself. And we're probably going to be presenting this again at South by Southwest later in the spring of 27. So the primer of the Biomimicry Co-Lab was to look at a big scoping phase in the early 3 months. What could we do to use biomimicry as a really defining change, and how could it create design solutions and look for solutions of tomorrow for infrastructure? And then we started creating, how big is it? How complex it is? And I understand some of you in this audience are probably saying this is a pipe dream, and it might be, but Portland is, of any place, has, if you've seen innovative change, it is in a community like Portland that gathers. And that's what I would say. We had a discussion. If this group could get together in one city, we could change the planet, or change that city at least. But we have to start having bigger, more complex discussions. So this group started looking at a creation strategy. We compiled a manifesto in the spring, and then we rolled out a kind of communication narrative about how to do that. So we met at Climate Week in New York last fall. We had deeper discussions. Here's around Heatherwick's piece there on the Hudson River. And we looked at the things that we could do. We could create a manifesto for adoption. We could announce the alliance. We'd launch a narrative campaign and a report of recommendations. Now, this has been building for a year. We're starting to roll this out. You'll start seeing it, hopefully, and hopefully you will consider even signing on to the manifestos. But here's the general purpose of it. It was to create and identify stories that the current extractive paradigm, as well as outline future ecocentric one, right? What resonates most with about this purpose statement is that the gist of it is right in front of us and is good enough to form a working group around to build on. That was the idea, that we could all come together and form a meaningful engagement. The alliance was actually what most resonated with most of us, was about this purpose statement. Is it the right idea? How could we move forward and create really significant discussion and change and broader thinking about designers really looking at the world differently? Well, it started with actually, looking at nature positive design and what would be the aha moments. And we said we were going to move from, having a discussion just about the built environment and nature, but nature in the built environment. And it goes back to water again. We started discussing how you build the future with a local ecosystem, and you start literally with it. You start with the waterways and the pathways and the pieces that allow us to survive. This was engaged with the bio weeks with Methuen, having this discussion around ecosystems like this. They build the ecosystem and learn from it. They learn from the water movements through the system. They look at the carbon sequestration, and then how does it move to these biomes, right? How do we look at biomes of the Western hemlock, the Doug fir, right? How do these lowlands shape these spaces and move on to riparian wetlands and floodplains and the seasonal runs of salmon and beaver ponds and willows and alder groves and salt marshes and mudflats and prairie oaks and woodlands? All of these ecosystems feed keystone species that are drivers in these systems. These create the foundational pieces of life for all living things. Now, this is a mindset that fits very deeply with Indigenous thinking. It starts with land stewardship. It understands that the land should give us all we need and we don't waste anything. And these are sacred relationships that value that we say prayers and celebrate in ceremony to all these living things that allow us to live in relationship with the land. The world that we live in looks a lot more like this. This is actually in Los Angeles in a project that Methuen was working on. This is the way we industrialize, we channelize these kind of infrastructures. But how can we use different changes? Here, the waterway gets moved downstream and just into the ocean, and these are channelized, but the carbon is lost too. And what that looks like in the way we look at living systems, we become really challenging with urban stormwater pollution and salmon toxic. They die of different contaminants in these systems that are dams and these kind of components. And how do we deal with all these pieces that really impact one of our key keystone species in the biomimicry look of raising temperatures and air and quality? And then how does it look like in conventional buildings, right? In conventional buildings, these are all the things of water, climate, habitat that we impact, and how can we change those? Can conventional buildings shift that mindset by looking at buildings more holistically around all living things. How can the building start being a component of infrastructure and good community members to repair and regenerate around this? Another example of this is looking at, these movements through how do we preserve habitat? We identify and protect remnant healthy habitat where present, and we build in places that are already affected. This is the Burke Museum with 70,000 native plants on the campus of the University of Washington in Seattle, right? So we look at components like this. We look at, this is Harbor Island, Seattle, salmon habitat restoration. We look at how do we restore those habitats, connecting the ways. We looked at some of this at Google, where we looked at re-oaking the entire, lower water deltas of that, moving invasive species. We connect habitats through treaties and waterways, stream channels. Those are all become drivers. And then these are the resources that are out there now: biodiversity, eco matrix, right? These different types of Pathfinder 3.0. There are ways to find the ecosystems that are in your neighborhood before you start having these discussions around the impact that you want to change in urban environments. And we have to start looking at ways to deal with all the way down to the insect level. So this is a kind of a quick snapshot of that. And one of the drivers that we ask for is, all we ask is that you start, right? You move forward, you start having this discussion. And this development is like rushing water. We cannot stop it, but if we direct it well, it can be a force for good. And it's a driver around these things: the economic, the social, the environmental. It's in balance. This is a very indigenous primer, thinking about components of this. This is also modeled out there in the five capitals model, where you're talking about social capital, cultural capital, financial capital, natural capital. These become, how do we make design decisions that are more holistic in its intent? So the biomimetic theories have changed. What do we do to cast a vision? What do you want to see of the future? And how do you dream of the world of tomorrow, right? How do you make that real? Well, we can learn things from examples like this, forests and how they recover through change and slides of devastation in one moment and fire recovery, to creating pioneer species, and over time, how the forest regenerates itself. Now, what this is done is, looking at panarchy. We talk about old growth being conservation, but the fires have the ability to release and reorganize and create the distribution of seeds and create new pioneer species and a movement around species. So this becomes a reorganization of societal moves at different scales. And if you deal with a local scale, it can grow to a global scale, a large scale. And that's why the beauty of having a conversation like this is always enriching for me, at least in the Portland market, because there's so many people there that believe in this same ethos, right? So where is the place that we want to prepare our own seeds? Well, here's one of the things that the Biomimicry group, the Co-Lab, said this is one of our challenges, right? This is who's the audience we want to reach? And it's major firms, clients, new hires, right? Strangers we encounter, and co-workers in sustainability. We've become pretty frustrated in a lot of areas by not having as big a change as we would like in seeing the built world. But we have to keep battling. We have to keep on this fight, and we have to keep moving forward. So, part of this is, how do we look at our organizations and our industry and how we've become, in some ways, outdated infrastructure? There's no longer serving us. And how do we transform these cultural dams? What is blocking our success? And how do we move those forward? Well, the examples are around us. This is a great example. The Klamath River and the removal of these historical infrastructure has been transformative to this river. That in turn has been transformative to the culture of the Klamath people and the way they see the river and the way they've invested in regenerating that landscape. There's pieces out there that we can start to talk about that support this. We talk about asknature.chat. This is the Biomimicry Institute's new engagement. You can go here. This is modeled after ChatGPT. It's kind of fun if you want to go explore this. And the primer here, the question at the bottom is, how can we provide a better mentorship to junior design professionals? Well, now it's using nature as the model for that primer by using nature as a discussion for that. The answer to that primer was this. We can look at mentorship through the ecological lens through a powerful design metaphor of nurturing junior designers. Move from instruction to participation, right? Design mentorship as a team responsibility. Teach through context and not abstraction. Pair mentorship with sponsorship and create a culture of shared growth. So this is a new tool that's being out there by the Biomimicry Institute that you can actually go and test and challenge using. But it's looking at a transformative change of place. It's about how to move our thinking, and the metaphor that we came up through 6 months, a year of discussions was around is to organize like mycelium, right? And what does that mean? Is it's the undergrowth of the mushroom, the complexity of the ecosystem, and the full fermentation of that living organism to survive and challenge its living conditions and make it better as it moves through different types of ecosystems. So here's the manifesto. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I do want to just make you aware it's going to start floating out there from Biomimicry. Uh, the initial firms have signed on to this, and but the primer of it is the Nature Positive Building Cities and Infrastructure Manifesto. The basic of it is it starts as humans are part of nature. Nothing we are or do is outside of a living system that supports life. So you can find this. It's out there floating now. But here's the big keys that they're asking professionals to consider signing onto, right? We stand for designing as nature. We start looking at designing in a more broad, complex biodiversity way, like a living system. We stand for regeneration through the built environment. How do we make these places to protect, restore, reconnect living systems, not fragment them? We stand for biological and long view thinking. This is a generational mindset. This is right from most indigenous belief structure, the 7 generational thinking intent, right? We stand for ecological performance in the built environment that benefits everyone, right? Everyone has balance in this. There's a recent book out there called Shade that I've been reading recently, and it's very intriguing, talking about shade may be the new design primer that we looked at in the 80s and 90s around air quality when we had so much pollution intent. But we're losing a real opportunity as a designers to reconnect with shade, and especially as we look at how cities are changing, right? So I think this is one of the primers that I argue around um, cities of tomorrow have to learn, find new ways to protect their most uh, groups of community that are under threats. And I see this in Portland quite often. There's many underserved communities that are living on minimal wages and very low income housing that don't have air conditioning. And some of you may have your own homes that don't have air conditioning. But I've seen the way that Portland is now adapting with more hot days is they're escaping into parks, shades. The park blocks are inundated with people that want to sit under shade. And it may be a new design primer where we're moving forward. And the last one of this is we believe that the built environment must evolve to do the same. We look at nature as a mentor, a model, a measure, and a commitment to evolving our systems, our decisions, and designs accordingly. So these are the primers for the Biomimicry Co-Lab, the manifesto that we've started to author. And what does this potentially look like in the future? Well, there's some indigenous examples that I'll share that are kind of living this manifesto in real time and what that looks like. The Lummi Nation in Washington was just recognized and for a significant award by the EPA. The Lummi Nation are people of the sea, right? They're a federally recognized tribe, a Salish tribe near Bellingham. They have 5,000 members. They're connected to the land, the water, the edges of these ecosystems, and they're known for their active role in environmental defense. They wrote a climate pledge in 10 years ago. Their pledge was 2016 when they originally wrote it, and they just updated in 26. But they were recently recognized by the EPA as one of the 5 most innovative projects for their Gooseberry Water Point wastewater treatment system. And the reason they did this was not about just wastewater. It was about actually finding ways for their tribe to reconnect to the waterways, but also their food sources, the oysters, the clams, the salmon. They saw this as a generational need, a change that they had to do, right? So this is one of the most important concepts out there. And this is where I believe that sovereign tribal governance has the ability, tribal nations have the ability to be the next innovators of real climate change forefront around design, because they are independent. So that becomes one of the drivers in moving that forward. Here's a project that I worked on. This is the U.S. Forest Service Kyle Canyon Gateway Visitor Center. It sets it at about 7,000 feet in the Spring Mountain Range in southern Nevada. It was worked on with the Biomimicry Guild and Regenerative. It's a building that speaks to the land. The diurnal winds that move up and down the valley kind of mimic jackrabbit ears in the same way a jackrabbit cools himself. But the more important piece, it was connecting the Niue and the Nuwuvi people to this land again. This mountain is called Navugante in their belief structure. This is them celebrating ceremony in this place. And the Nuwuvi people are typically known as the Southern Paiute. There's 7 tribes that make up them, and this image in the lower left is the Seven Stones Plaza that I was fortunate to work on for them. And this, we brought a rock from every one of those tribal communities, because all the waterways come back to Navogante, which is the center stone, the mountain here. And this is where Ocean Woman was originally. All of these weathering steel pipes represent the rivers from each tribal nation, and each rock representing that nation. And the best part of this project's been complete now for about 12, maybe 15 years. The best part of this is all the 7 tribes send representatives every year to this mountain to collect pinyon nut harvest, but they also go there to actually reconnect around native languages. Their language is a way to reconnect. It's a very challenging language to speak, but their language is important for them to hold on to. This mountain, this project helped them hold on to their language. And so that became one of the real most important pieces of a cultural legacy that a project had. And the project, just so you know, was a brownfield site. It was a former golf course that was completely restored and moved to a regenerative mindset with all native vegetation and intent. And the people now of the tribe, but also the greater community of Southern Nevada, embraces that intent. So one closer to home that I'm directly responsible for and working on, this is the Center for Tribal Nation in the OMSI district, and this is the one I'll close with, and then I'll try to answer any questions that you have, because I've tried to fly through these pretty quick so we have time for discussions at the end. The Center for Tribal Nation is located on Tract H of this map. It's right across the main entryway from OMSI. This is a district master plan. It's being looked at as potentially with a central utility plant. It's being looked at as a resiliency hub. But the center of this kind of heart of this is Site H, and that's why the Center for Tribal Nations selected that site. The mission statement, the vision statement for the project, is dreamt into existence for decades. The Center for Tribal Nations celebrates and catalyzes the power of Indigenous people, cultures, and presence on the river. The idea behind this is to reheal both the edges of the waterfront through the Waterfront Education Park, which OMSI leads now with CritFIC. ATNI, the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians, was involved in this early, and they gifted the stewardship of the Center for Tribal Nations to the Northwest Native Chamber, who took over that portion of it. And CritFic is in partnership and leading with OMSI on the Waterfront Education Park on this to reconnect native species along the waterway, heal it, create a more communicatable, interpretive experience, but also a pathway for commuters and walkers along that. But the primer around this, we just completed this probably 60 days ago. We'll present this to Metro here. We presented to Prosper Portland about 3 weeks ago. We present to Metro on September 15th. This is the idea of what the Center for Tribal Nations could look like. This is the conceptual design package we just completed. As you see OMSI here in this AXO perspective, Tract H is across the street, and this is the Center for Tribal Nations. Old Water Avenue is here. New Water Avenue will move back behind the building. But here is just a quick recognition of all the complexity of our design team and who was involved. Northwest Native Chamber, Prosper Portland Metro, these were the leaders up front of this. We had grants from Meyer Memorial Trust, Northwest Area Foundation, Metro was the driver. We've partnered with Multnomah County on a grant, but Holst was our local architect. Very happy. They did a great job in leading our local engagement, because this building is going to be a 5-story poured in place concrete podium because of the unique shape, with a 13-story mass timber high rise on top. And our Indigenous design team was Full Circle Indigenous Planning Design out of Minneapolis, Tawa out of Scottsdale, and Encompass. Those firms were supported by the subconsultants you see below. And so I was working early as the vision expert when I was a principal at Sarah, but now I work as the owner's project manager for the Northwest Native Chamber. The drivers behind the project are this: restore a physical presence on the river, site consideration, establish a community gathering place, and create economic impact, really changing Indigenous entrepreneurship. The cultural design concept of this was actually listening to the land. Design the story focus, Indigenous integration. We wrote the narrative around this, about this place being connected to the land and the Cascades. And then this became the driver of the concept. We looked at the waterways, the movements, the Columbia, the waterfalls, and this nod of these plateaus. And then we looked at the basalt colonnades, and this became the driver about rooted in time, both past, present, and future, and then balance between human and ecological stories, and integrating multiple ways of knowing. And the building design become to kind of represent this movement around waterfalls and this connection to platforms and connections that represented from the Celilo Falls engagement, right? How we honored this in these plateaus and creating a ceremonial space. As you see, the Grand Run, the basalt, the colonnades, these became the drivers in the architectural model for that. The look of it was set up in this, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, but it has an Indigenous marketplace. It has an event center, conferencing. It has a central utility plant. We have a tribal data sovereignty center here for protecting tribal data sovereignty. That's a real issue now. We have a cultural conference and event center, health and wellness, and then we have 4 levels of hotel, hospitality, 4 levels of housing, 3 levels of office for Indigenous entrepreneurs, and then a rooftop restaurant. And the way this looks is this is the way the building would look across from the top of OMSI. The building, as I said, has this kind of feel of waterfall down the elevator core, wrapping around the ceremony, coming down to the main entry. The podium is down below, Indigenous marketplace. Ceremonial library is up here, so we can look out over the river into the Western Hills. And then there's prayer towers to the Cascades in the morning sunrise, and then a rooftop restaurant. But one of the fun parts of this that I'll tell you is we're not only thinking about just the finished product, but we're thinking about an interim project. So this is the full site that we hope, we had a grant through EPA and Climate United to turn this site into a complete native landscape growing nursery for the entire OMSI district. So we would grow all the plant materials in the microclimates that they would be replanted on the river, and we would use the site through the 2-3 years of design process, design review, as a native nursery intent. This is an interim solution of how we want to have more mature plant species ready to go to fit in the district when it moves forward. So that's the exact site, and this is what it looks like when it transforms into a finished product. You can see the nudge of the fishing platforms, the ceremony, the intent, the grand entry, and then these are the views out of the prayer towers looking out across the river into the Cascades. Mount Rose there you see in the distance, Wyates, as that Indians term for that. And this is the building, and this is how we conclude. We finish with a different perspective on the district systems and infrastructure and way a new engagement process can look like, using all of these types of indigenous knowledge, biomimicry thinking for a new type of district level infrastructure in the OMSI district. So with that, I want to wish you Wadu, Cherokee word for thank you. There's my email address and my website if you have any questions, and I will pause there and see if there's any questions or if I have not caused anybody to stop falling asleep.
We do have a number of questions in the chat. Thank you, Jeff. So just a quick reminder to folks, please feel free to raise your digital hand if you'd like to be called on to verbalize your own question, or you can post it in the chat and I can read it off. So first up, Jeff, do you have suggestions when guiding the formation of design teams on who or what skill sets to include in urban or suburban redevelopment?
Yeah, I'm going to take it from a very biased perspective first. I'm going to take it from the perspective, I think there's some amazing people of different minority backgrounds that understand their places. And I think those are the people that I would ask you, how do you engage them? Is it an anthropologist? Is it an archaeologist? Is it a sociologist? My former firm, we actually embedded 3 sociologists in our office for some time to learn their process, their style. But also there's a way that you can engage indigenous designers of tomorrow and how.
Oh, is that us, Kathy?
I think that's just Jeff.
I think it's just Jeff.
Something happened in West Virginia, clearly.
Oh, shoot. See if he can come on back in.
Does he even know that he's
There, his name just reappeared. Jeff, did we get you back? Jennifer Barnes, no. Jeff just logged off. Unfortunately, we don't have much choice but to wait and see if he can get back on.
Well, in the meantime, it looks like we have one other question that was posted to the chat. If other folks have additional questions, please feel free to post them in the chat or raise your hand, presuming that we can get Jeff back on with decent enough bandwidth to be able to respond to some of the questions. If he's not able to jump back on or we continue to have issues, we can also copy some of these questions and send them over to him for him to be able to respond with a response. So if you'd like a response to those, you could also include your email address, and I'm sure he'd be happy to follow up with you directly.
This is interesting. I've been doing this for, there he is, for 6 years now. And this is the first time this has really happened.
This is the first time, so it's not us, but
I am so sorry.
hey,
I'm so
it's quite all right. We've been waiting because we've been enjoying it so much. Aaron's got questions for you, Jeff.
okay. Sorry, Aaron.
No problem.
That is okay. All right. So let's go ahead and jump to the next question, which was, how has this effort looked at natural processes that cause destruction, sometimes cataclysmic, such as earthquakes, tsunami, as well as large-scale fires and flooding?
Wow, there's a lot of different components there, but I think the one thing that I would say about that is I think indigenous cultures embrace those type of things. They tell stories about theirs. There's actually significant stories around the Klamath about Crater Lake and how that fire-breathing mountain actually transformed into a serpent and intent, right? And how these pieces, they become stories. And I think that's one of the things that way too often we forget is indigenous cultures of North America were considered actually uncivilized. And they were considered uncivilized or given that terminology because the mindset around they didn't have a written language. This is where Asian cultures, Persian cultures had written documents, scrolls that they were considered much more intellectual. Indigenous people of North America had storytelling and they were damn good at it. And they were really good at it. So they talk about floods and tsunamis and the macaw population. I was at macaw about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. They talk about tsunamis that wiped out villages and the intent. And they talk about the sea serpents that actually created these moments. But they weave those into stories that become cultural components about awareness, change, and the intent. In the same way as I hope that we look at Portland and we talk about the monsters of colonialization. Our river has been completely created by flood walls, and it was done for shipping. It was done for a purpose. It was done with an intent. But I just recently saw a photo yesterday of Centennial Mills um, before the warehouse that just burnt down, but it was all the mills that were along the waterways. That has changed drastically. All you see now are the old mass timbers in the river. But at one point, that created a transformation moment. How do we create a transformation moment to ease back the edges along the downtown waterfront? We don't have shipping showing up the way we used to in the waterfront, but is there a way that we can re-heal the waterways, the communities of our place to make them embraced? And Chicago's been doing it with a new urban design along their waterfront. There's opportunities, but I think natural disasters are part of the storytelling, and they can be a preparation moment for how we look at new ways to engage.
Great. We also have a question about, has urban food forests been part of the greater citywide conversation? And then a comment looking forward to this concept as a reality in Portland.
Definitely. We're all the vegetation that was on CTN, everything down below, as I've already told the city of Portland, I want to break about 8 to 10 different building codes. One of them, being, hey, if I'm going to do a mass timber building and we do smudging to wash smoke over us, I want to have open flame, open smoke in a mass timber high rise. And I watched heads explode. So, but we're going to change that. The University of Toronto has a dormitory that has modeled that. But along the food side, we also want food sovereignty, and we want some engagement around this. Is how do we create this movement around a building that can be a food source for us? That's why the restaurant, the the plants that we're looking at growing, everything that's not at grade level is going to rise up to hopefully a food service or a medicinal level for indigenous people, camas, berries, these type of things. And then the one of the other rules that I want to break is I don't want every street tree every 20, 30 feet. I want an ecosystem. I want an ecosystem at the street edge that creates stormwater before it gets to the Willamette. I want a whole living system that is embraced along that. So that is one of the discussions. And as I mentioned, the tribal data sovereignty piece we talked about is we know there are tribal nonprofits right now loading up their hard drives and putting them in Pelican briefs, and they're not smuggling, but they're moving them across the northern border into Canada to create tribal data sovereignty. So they're afraid of their data being compromised and being lost. So with that said, we want this center to be also a repository for tribal data information, third party as a nonprofit. But that spun into a whole nother argument about, could this center also be a place for tribal seed storage of certain tribes that may be losing seed access in other places, fires across the Ojibwe, the Cherokee, the Seminole? Could this place be a national seed repository of important plants to those tribes that they had a backup in this location or place? So.
Yeah, very cool.
Great. All right, I'm going to do one more question because I think this is an excellent one. So there's some awesome kudos in here from Pam Emerson, but also some great questions about how to scale up some of this regenerative thinking and start thinking about that in the public sector via planning processes like transportation systems, drainage, water system, parks, and open spaces. Would love to see a manifesto like the one you shared get seeded or take hold in public sector planning. And does this exist? I happen to know, Jeff, that you've been doing some thinking about how all of this starts to fold into urban design guidelines. Can I put you on the spot to maybe pontificate about that aloud for a minute?
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Love this question. It's complex on a lot of different levels, but here's the primer that I would say is I believe that tribal sovereign governments, because they're independent landowners, they make their own decisions, their own intent. Sometimes they'll have their own planning, and we have seen the first emergence of a tribal specific building code committee for the IBC. How do we do a section in the code for a sweat lodge, right? Because that's not there, right? So how do we look at also planning and substantive thinking? I was in some courses last year at ASU around the conservative online about how do we look at planning and moving this way. I have a belief structure that right now, tribal nations, if they can regain the respect and the trust of the design profession, tribal nations have to be a platform where they have the willingness, the knowledge to re-heal environments to create effective mitigation to climate change and the issues going on that we're facing on the planet, because there are sovereign tribal governments embedded in us. We can learn from them. So there's one that we can start with, but you have to be able to understand that the design profession, government's jurisdiction, they have lost faith. They don't, tribal nations don't trust them because you're not willing to listen. And if you don't understand this, I'll give you this one primer right now about working with tribes. It's not about a building. It's not about a place. It's not about a landscape. It's about a relationship. And the question is, do you have the patience and the effort to engage in a meaningful relationship? Because if you do, you need to listen, and you need to know the relationship is just not now, it's for a lifetime. So with that said, I also have an issue, which I gave a one-year lecture to the city of Portland around change, right? How do we have in the Central City Master Plan design decision-making, and this is where you can step up and support this thinking with me if you would like, I would love that, is the Central City Master Plan has a whole primer section on Chinatown, right? Has a whole primer on waterfront, right? Connect the one, and it's good. Listen, it's good. I was blown away when I moved to Portland and started working in it. It's a good document. How many sections in that document speak to Indigenous people? Exactly. Exactly. And I told that to the city of Portland. I go, how do you expect to understand this place and have designers design to a central city master plan, and you speak nothing about the people that were here or how the people that are still here? You don't speak to an Indigenous metaphor around holistic thinking. So my goal is to get back in front of a group of city planners, government agencies, with a group like this behind as support, in saying we need to change the central city master plan design thinking to embrace Indigenous people in a meaningful way if we really want to understand our place. And there's other places that do it. Santa Fe has some of these hints. The Pueblo Cultural Center in Albuquerque has some of those. But the hope is the OMSI district has the potential to become the first Indigenous district in the United States, right? Right? Why not here? Why not Portland? Why not leading the way? We have Germantown, we have Little Italy, we have Chinatown, we have Japantown. Where's Indigenous? I mean, we're a country that was founded by these people in this intent, but we don't have that. And why not in Portland? Portland could be a leading example. And the airport is a great gateway to that. 5 different tribes provided wood to the new airport, and the airport is a game changer. A game changer. Sorry, Aaron. I got a little preachy there.
That was fantastic. That was fantastic.
Yeah,
I think we
fantastic.
are out of time, though. David, did you want to wrap us up with any concluding
Yeah.
thoughts?
I was literally typing
Great.
like, I'm sorry, I have to go, Jeff. Thank you so very much for visiting us today. And that's a lot to reflect upon. And I'm hoping we can continue a conversation. This is an open invitation for you to come back, see this urban design panel as a platform where you might expand more on one of any of those given points that you've brought up. Please to see it that way. We look forward to it. And if you want to update the OMSI project, let us know through Aaron. We'll look forward to seeing you back here. Aaron, thanks for hosting the Q&A. It seems like a lot of people were here. I feel like there's an appetite to know more and hear more. So Jeff, I'll give it to you for any last thoughts.
I think all the friends, colleagues, future colleagues, community members that showed up, you've helped shape me to be in this place, and I'm honored to be in this room with you. And hopefully that this message had something that stirred in you. And if so, please reach out to me. I'm still there and still love that community very much.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, sir. Everybody, we're working on a subject for the September Urban Design Panel, TBD, to be announced. October, we're going to see OMSI come back to the panel, and we've all got to run and get in meetings, Jeff. So have a great day. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.